Hi friends, we're back for part 4 of the Sew With Me project, and we trued our pattern up in the last video, and today we are going to be cutting our fashion fabric. Super exciting. So let's get started. Okay, so we have all of our paper pattern pieces now, and I've started to kind of lay out my fabric here on my table. This is a stripe, obviously it's a stripe, and there's a couple things to know here. First of all, when you go to the fabric store, chances are they're not going to cut it on grain. So when you're doing this, let me adjust this view a little bit here. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're laying your fabric out according to the grain and not according to how it's been cut. So the stripes here are a help to us. I think I'm going to cut my shorts pieces first since they're bigger. You also want to look at, is there a right or a wrong side to your fabric? So does one side look different than the other? And if so, which one do you want to have the outside? Whatever you want to have the outside be should be facing down away from you when you're cutting. So you're cutting and marking on the wrong side of the fabric. This pattern does not reverse, which means that I can only cut my stripes. I can't fold the fabric and cut both at the same time, is what I'm trying to say. So I need to cut one, and then I'm actually going to cut that piece and then flip it over and make sure that we're matching that on the other side, as opposed to cut both of them at the same time. So I've laid my fabric out and I've made sure that my stripes are all going straight across my table, but I'm also going to make sure that going this way, they're not sort of pulled in that direction. So we're making sure that our grains going both directions, straight of grain and cross grain, are both even and straight before we start laying our fabric out. Okay, I changed the angle so we can see the whole thing. So this is what I was talking about, how my fabric is off grain. So what my end is, this is a straight line obviously, and this is sort of woodgy kind of going off. So I need to make sure that I'm carefully cutting so everything is on grain, so everything lays nicely later. Okay, so now I need to decide where I want my stripes to end up. So generally when you are making something that has stripes, you want to make sure that the stripes end up in the same place across your body. So you don't want to have one red stripe here on one side and then one stripe here on the other side. You want both sides to be somewhat symmetrical. So my first piece, I'm going to lay like this. I think I don't want this dark stripe going like straight down the middle of the crotch seam, because I think that would be a little bit weird. So I'm going to off center that a little bit so that ends up, that first one ends up under that pleat there. And then I'm also making sure that my grain line here that we marked is going straight along one of these stripes to make sure that my fabric is staying on the grain. Okay. And you can pin your patterns directly to the fabric if you want, or you can use pattern weights to keep it together, whatever's easier. These are fancy, I mean not really fancy, but these are like real pattern weights. You can also use like heavy washers, like when you're screwing on like a nut and a bolt, a washer, whatever you want. So I'm going to mark this with my friction pens, and we're just going to mark all the way around, making sure to keep that pencil or marker line right on the edge of the fabric. Now, friction pins are cool because they disappear when you iron them. Be aware that they may not disappear on all fabrics. Sometimes they leave, like on a sheer silk or something, they'll leave like a shadow of something. So just make sure that you're marking A on the back side, and B, try not to make it somewhere where if it reappears, they'll sometimes come back if you're in like really cold weather, which I doubt that I'm going to be wearing a short romper in the wintertime. But if it's really cold outside, I guess sometimes these markings come back. So make sure you're marking all of your notches and all of your various circles and squares and dashes. So there we are with our first piece. I also want to make sure that I'm not, because I'm cutting these separately and not two at the same time, I want to remember which sides I've cut. So I'm going to make an X on this side because I've already cut this side. So the next piece I'll mark like this. Sometimes I will mark everything out first and then cut. Kind of depends on what I'm doing, but since I'm trying to pattern match a little bit, okay, so then I need a reverse of this. In order to match this pattern as closely as possible, we're going to make sure we're cutting out two of the same thing. So this is the side that has my notches on it, so I'm going to lay that face down. And then I'm going to lay out the fabric directly on top of where my pattern goes. My stripes are, so that I'm making sure to cut the same on both sides so I can have both sides be symmetrical. And then I am going to pin these together. Okay, and then last step, I'm going to transfer all of my notches from the one piece to the other. And then sometimes, especially if I have a lot of pattern pieces, I'll lay that piece, the pattern piece, on top of the fabric and fold it up and just put it aside so that I know that I'm done with that one. Okay, then this is the back. Again, I'm going to decide where I want my stripes to lay on my body. Actually, I'm going to look at this a little bit to see if I can make this attractive. So if you do want to try to pattern match something like this, you just need to remember that you do have seam allowance on here. So what looks like the edge is actually 5/8 wider than what the edge is. So just take that into consideration. You may need to overlay the pieces a little bit to get a good match. Again, that's why I prefer to do this without seam allowance and add it as I'm cutting, because it's just much easier when you're trying to not only alter patterns but true up things and pattern match and do all sorts of things like that. Then again, I'm laying this face down, well, wrong side down on top here and matching up all of my lines. So I had opened up this bodice, but I actually didn't. It looks like a dart right now as opposed to ease, so I'm going to have to draw a straight line here to account for that. Okay, so this is my side piece, my side back piece. And I'd like it to match somewhat, though I suppose it doesn't really matter because this gets eased in a little bit, so I'm not sure that it would regardless. But this is also on a different grain than the front is. Okay, so now I have everything but my waistband cut out. So then I need to decide what line I'd like my waistband to be. And I think I kind of like this darker red and black section. So I'm gonna lay my fabric, my pattern out. So that's evenly spaced over that line. And then I'm being really careful when I cut this piece because this is where it'll start to be very obvious if your line is not even with this stripe pattern. mark all of these lines first. And I'm actually just going to follow the line of the stripe when I cut, because I'll actually be more successful getting an even cut that way. Okay, so now I need to cut my linings and facings. So for both the waistband, which the pattern calls for, and for the front and the back sections, because this fabric is super flimsy, I want to cut another layer, so there's a double layer. I think I have enough fabric to do all of that. I also haven't cut my pocket yet, and I need to cut 4 sections of the pocket. So I'm not as concerned with what the pattern is for the facings, because you're not going to see any of that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, and hopefully I have enough fabric to do all of that. And then I'm ready to go into my fabric to start sewing. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a interfacing for my waistband. So I'm going to use this really lightweight Tricot iron-on interfacing. I think it's something, what does the instructions say? Fusible interfacing. So I would, depending on what your fabric is, will tell you what you need. Generally for a garment like this, something that's really lightweight is probably better. You don't want it to be super stiff because you want it to sort of still have some drape and be comfortable to wear. So I'm just going to cut one layer out of this fusible. Okay, so there we are, ready to put our romper together the next time. Got all my pieces cut out, the interfacings cut out. These are my scraps that are left. I had just enough. I had to cut one of my pockets in kind of a weird way. No one's going to be looking at the inside of the pocket to see if I pattern matched or not. So next time we will get to sewing. See you then.